In this video, we're going to take a look at a little bit more stuff with quadratics. It's going to kind of put together things that we've learned in the other videos. So let's start with f of x or y equals 2x squared plus 8x minus 10. Okay, and we could be asked for, let's say that we're asked for the vertex, the y-intercept, and the x-intercepts if they exist. Alright, we haven't talked about them in this form, but we have talked about y-intercept and x-intercept. So let's remember vertex is hk, or h is negative b over 2a. It's hk if it's in the right form. This isn't in the right form, so we could use negative b over 2a and plug it back in to get k. Alright, x-intercept and y-intercept, we talked about these way back at the beginning of the semester. Okay, remember that the y-intercept is always in the form 0b, and the x-intercept is always in the form a0, because they sit on the x-axis and the y-axis. So to find the y-intercept, we could always plug in x equals 0, and solve for y, or f of x. And then for the x-intercept, we plug in 0 for y, or f of x, same thing, and solve for x. Okay, so that was way back at the start of the semester. We talked about intercepts. We haven't really come back to them in a while, but they are pretty important stuff in math. Alright, so these are the three things that you might be asked to find, and then of course you can take these three things and get a pretty good graph from them. So back to our problem, 2x squared plus 8x minus 10. If we want to find the vertex, again we're not in the right form, so we're going to use negative b over 2a. And this is our a, this is our b, this is our c. Remember, if it's not in the right form, you can either put it in the right form, or remember that a is always in front of the x squared, b is always in front of the x, and c is the number by itself. So we're going to put 8 and 2 into our equation here. So we're going to have negative 8 over 2 times 2. Now in this section, the numbers might get a little bit messy. So if you need to put this in your calculator, please remember that you've got to put parentheses around the denominator on most calculators. Otherwise, it's going to read it as 8 over 2, and then multiply the whole thing by 2. So I'm going to write these parentheses in every time. You've got to remember to use them on your calculator. This one's not too bad to do in our head. We've got 8 over 4. So negative 8 over 4, that's going to be 2. We get negative 2 for our h value. And then to get k, remember we take that and we plug it back into our equation. So we're going to have 2 times negative 2 squared plus 8 times negative 2 minus 10. It's going to give us 8 minus 16 is negative 8. Negative 10 would give us negative 18. So our vertex is hk, which is negative 2, negative 18. Alright, so there's our vertex. Now we always have a vertex and a y-intercept for parabolas. Always, always. So for y-intercept, we put in x equals 0. So we're going to plug 0 into our equation. We're going to get 2 times 0 squared plus 8 times 0 minus 10. Again, remember your order of operations here. We're going to square first and then multiply. So we're going to get 0 plus 0 minus 10. Those first two terms drop out, and we just get negative 10. So our y-intercept is negative 10. And for the x-intercept, you don't always have x-intercepts. That's where it crosses the x-axis. But if you are going to have x-intercepts, you're going to set y equal to 0, or f of x equal to 0, and you're going to solve. Now when we do that, okay, we're going to put 0 in here. We've got 0 equals 2x squared plus 8x minus 10. Now we're solving a quadratic equation. Quadratic equations are what we've been doing for the last however many classes. So this should somewhat look familiar to you. You're going to look for factors, common factors, easy binomial factors like FOIL, the reverse of FOIL. You're going to look to see if you can do any factoring, and then if you can't, you're going to use the quadratic formula. So looking at this one, do we have any common factors? We have 2 as a common factor, so we can actually divide the whole equation by 2. That'll make life easier no matter what method you use. So we're going to get x squared plus 4x minus 5. Now look to see if this factors, because if it factors, that's way easier than quadratic formula. It does factor. Factors of 5, that would give us 4. Should be positive 5 and negative 1. They multiply to be negative 5. They add to be positive 4. And we know that if we're factored equal to 0, something times something equals 0, we can break this up. And we can solve each of these little equations. My pen is lagging a bit here. Okay, so we get negative 5, and we get positive 1. And those are our x-intercepts. Now, if you got no solution, sometimes we say no solution for these, right? That would mean no x-intercepts, and that's okay. You can have a parabola that doesn't cross the x-axis. You just have to take that into consideration. So you may just be asked to find those pieces. You may also be asked to graph this. So let's go ahead and look at what this would look like. Sorry, my pen's going a little crazy here. I think I might be about out of batteries. Okay, so let's take these pieces of information and let's graph them together. Okay, we need kind of a big graph for this one because we got to get to negative 2, negative 18. Okay, whoa, all the way down there. All right, negative 2, negative 18, down there. Our y-intercept is negative 10, right there. And our x-intercepts are positive 1 and negative 5. All right, now all of these graphs should be U-shaped. This one's going to be hard to graph on my tablet. Sorry, it's hard for me to graph long straight lines, but there you get the idea. They should all be U-shaped. Okay, no matter what else is going on. If they are kind of wonky and they're leaning on its side, they should be symmetric. So if they're kind of leaning on the side or the points aren't lining up or whatever, then something went wrong and you need to go back and fix your points because they should always be in a nice symmetric U shape. Mine's off by just a smidge, but if I could draw better, it would look good. Okay, so that's the idea there. You can find the vertex, the x-intercepts, and the y-intercepts. All right, let's do one application. So in some of these problems, they might give you an application with these. One common one is height. So let's say that they give you a height formula. Now, fortunately, in this class, we're not going to have to derive these equations. That would be kind of a physics problem with initial velocity, initial height, and stuff like that. You're going to get the equation, but you've got to be able to use it. So this is h is height, and t is time, I think in seconds for this setup. There we go. So h is the height of a projectile, and t is the time. And the cool thing about these problems is that a projectile actually follows a parabolic path. So the path of the projectile is a parabola. So it's not just a matter of graphing it, but it's actually doing it. So your height is your y direction, and then your time is how far along that path they are. Now, the highest point on your projectile's path is your vertex. So in general, for quadratic applications, the vertex is either going to be the maximum or minimum. So when you see what's the maximum height or what's the maximum value or minimum value, what they're actually asking you to do is find the vertex, and we know how to do that now. So let's say they ask you, what is the maximum height? And we say, okay, well, we know that, you know what, I'm going to change this to a capital H because this is going to be confusing. Okay, that's our height. Little h of the hk is the vertex. If we want to find the maximum height, we've got to find hk. This is your time value, and this is your function value, which is actually your height. So for any quadratic application, you've got to do the negative b over 2a, and then you've got to plug it back in. You've got to plug it back in here to actually get the height. So little h is negative b over 2a. Here's our a, here's our b, here's our c. So we're going to have negative 64 over 2 times negative 16. That's going to come out positive. 64 over 32 is 2. Okay, but that's not our height, that's actually our time. That's our variable. And then we plug it back in to get our height. So we're going to have negative 16 times 2 squared plus 64 times 2 plus 14. And that should give us, I think that comes out to 75. And I believe the unit for this is in feet, but just go with whatever the question gives you. I think this setup is in feet per seconds for the values that were given. Okay, so the maximum height is 75 feet, and it happens at 2 seconds. Okay, so that's the idea there. When they're looking for maximum, they're looking for vertex. So anytime you see maximum or minimum, you think vertex, and you think negative b over 2a, and plug it back in. All right, another one that they might ask you is, at what time does the object hit the ground? Okay, at what time does the object hit the ground? And that one can be kind of tricky because they're not giving you a number, right? You're like, well, I don't know what to do with this. Well, in these types of problems in physics and anywhere else, remember that the ground is where h is equal to 0. The ground is where h is equal to 0. So that means that you're going to set this whole, capital H, height. Okay, the ground is where height is equal to 0. So you're going to take this whole thing and you're going to set it equal to 0, and you're going to solve. Most of these you're going to have to use quadratic formula on, just because in real life numbers generally don't work out nicely. You can, however, divide this by 2, and in fact I would probably divide it by negative 2. Just in general, it's easier to have a positive out front, whether you're factoring, quadratic formula, whatever it is, it's generally easier to have a positive out here. So you at least want to multiply through by a negative. I would go ahead and divide everything by negative 2 just to make the quadratic formula a little bit easier. So we'd have 8t squared minus 32t minus 7. So there's your A, there's your B, and there's your C. It's not gonna factor, but that does make your life a little bit easier. So I'm almost out of time. I'm gonna skip to the answer here. I'll let you guys do this one on your own. You should get that t is equal to 4.208. So at 2 seconds, it's going to reach its maximum height. And then at 4.2 seconds, it's going to hit the ground. And that seems reasonable. It's actually not starting on the ground. It's starting a little bit in the air like that. But that's the general idea, is that it actually follows that path, and you can watch it as it goes up to the highest point and then down around and hit the ground.